Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I was recruited by the Men in Black on the dark web. My first assignment was to cover up an alien invasion in Antarctica. Alright, so I know how this sounds. I get it. You're probably already rolling your eyes or assuming I'm about to tell you some made-up BS. But I swear on everything I love, this really happened to me. And if you've got a few minutes, I'm going to take you down a rabbit hole you'll wish you never went down. Because once you hear this, you won't be able to forget it. Let me start from the beginning. So I've always been kind of tech-savvy, not in a coding genius kind of way, but more like I've spent way too many hours on the internet, and I know my way around places most people shouldn't even know exist. We're talking the deep web. Not that I'm gonna buy some illegal substances side of the deep web you hear about on Netflix documentaries, but the weirder, darker side. The stuff no one really talks about because they're either too scared or they don't even know it's there. Anyway, a couple of months ago, I was browsing around in some forums, deep web forums where people discuss things like conspiracy theories, cryptids, and government secrets. Stuff that'll make you question whether the world is even real sometimes. But one thread caught my eye that night, one I had never seen before. It was called Special Opportunities for Those Who Seek the Truth. I don't know what made me click on it. Maybe it was the wording, or maybe I was just bored and looking for something new to freak me out. But the second I did, my entire browser froze for a moment. Like, legit froze. I thought I'd clicked on a bad link or downloaded something sketchy, but before I could close it, a pop-up appeared on my screen. It was a message. You have been invited to a special job opportunity. If interested, proceed. If not, leave now. No joke, my first thought was, this is some kind of scam. But the thing is, it didn't ask for any personal info, didn't try to get me to download anything. It just sat there, waiting for me to decide. So, naturally, being the curious idiot I am, I clicked proceed. Immediately, my screen went black. Completely black. No toolbar, no cursor, nothing. I was about to shut down my entire computer when the screen flickered, and I was staring at a website I've never seen before. It was plain, just black text on a white background, no logos, no design, just words. We know you seek the truth. We know you're capable of more than you think. Welcome to the next level. Before I could process what the hell I was reading, a form popped up below it. A job application form. Name, age, skill set, basic stuff. But there was a catch. It wasn't asking for anything personal. Just generic info, like what are your strengths? And are you willing to work outside the law? That should have been my red flag. That should have been where I clicked out and went back to my normal life. But something about it felt different. It didn't feel like some fake job ad trying to lure in suckers. It felt legit, like there was something bigger going on. So like the idiot I am, I filled it out. I didn't expect to hear back. I mean, who does? It's the deep web, and 90% of the stuff on there is just nonsense. But 2 days later, I got an email. And this wasn't some scammy-looking, poorly written email either. This looked official. It had no subject line, and the body of the email was just one sentence. Your interview is scheduled for tomorrow. Be ready. That was it. No time, no location, nothing. Honestly, I thought I was being pranked. I even called up a buddy of mine who knows more about the deep web than I do, and I told him about the whole thing. He just laughed and said I was probably going to get scammed or end up on some watch list. But then again, he also said he'd never seen anything like what I described, so he didn't really have any solid advice. I wasn't expecting anything to happen. I mean, how could they interview me? I hadn't given them any real contact info. I hadn't given them my address or phone number. And yet, when the next day rolled around, that's when things got real. I was sitting at home, casually going about my day, when I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Look outside. Now, I've seen enough horror movies to know that this is usually the part where the main character makes a dumb decision. But against my better judgment, I peeked through my blinds, and that's when I saw it. A black SUV parked right outside my apartment. Now, I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood, so a car like that sticks out like a sore thumb. The windows were tinted so dark you couldn't see inside, and it was just sitting there, not running, not doing anything, just parked. I immediately grabbed my phone to take a picture, but as soon as I lifted it up, the car's engine roared to life, and it took off down the street, fast, like they knew what I was about to do. Then my phone buzzed again. We'll be in touch. And that's how it started. I should have been freaked out, but part of me was intrigued. It was like I'd opened Pandora's box, and there was no way I could just close it now. I had to know what was going on. So, I waited. I waited for days. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race, wondering if it was them again. But nothing came. No more texts, no emails, nothing. It was radio silence, until I got the letter. 3 days later, there was a knock on my door. Not a regular knock either, like someone was tapping with their knuckles, just loud enough for me to hear, but not so loud that it would wake the neighbors. When I opened the door, no one was there. But on my doorstep was a plain, black envelope. No stamp, no address, just my name, typed in small, neat letters. I brought it inside, hands shaking, and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with one line on it. Your first assignment, Antarctica. Cover up the event. Details to follow. And that's when I realized, whatever this was, it was way bigger than me. I wasn't just some random guy anymore. I was part of something huge, something dangerous. But at the time, I had no idea just how dangerous it would get, and I definitely wasn't ready for what was waiting for me in Antarctica. So there I was, standing in my tiny living room, holding this cryptic letter with Antarctica staring back at me like it was no big deal. The more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. I mean, Antarctica. Why would anyone send me to cover something up there? I'm not some government agent or a spy. I'm just a dude who spends too much time online. But at the same time, something about it felt inevitable, like I'd stepped into a game that I didn't even know I was playing, and now there was no way out. The letter didn't give any specifics, but a week later, I received a small package. No return address, no indication of who it was from. Just my name again, in that same cold, impersonal typeface. Inside was a one-way plane ticket to Argentina, along with a tiny black flip phone, the kind you'd expect to see in a spy movie. There was no explanation, no instructions, but the message was clear. I was expected to go. So, after some internal debate and a lot of pacing, I packed my bag, grabbed the essentials, laptop, charger, a few clothes, and headed to the airport. Part of me was waiting for something to go wrong, for security to flag the ticket, or for someone to stop me before I boarded the plane. But everything went smoothly, almost too smoothly, like they had greased the wheels to make sure I got there without a hitch. The flight was long. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape shift from bustling cities to endless stretches of water. When I finally landed in Buenos Aires, it was late, and I was exhausted, but there was no time to rest. The second I turned my phone on, the black flip phone buzzed in my pocket. Outside, now. I didn't have to think twice. I grabbed my bag and made my way through the crowded terminal to the exit, and there it was again, a black SUV, almost identical to the one that had been outside my apartment. I hesitated for a second, half expecting someone to step out and drag me inside, but the door popped open on its own, and a voice came from the dark interior. "Get in." I don't know what I was expecting, but the second I slid into the back seat, I realized this was the real deal. There were no introductions, no small talk. The driver, dressed in an all-black suit and wearing sunglasses, yes, even though it was nighttime, handed me a thick envelope as soon as the car started moving. I opened it, and what I saw inside made my stomach flip. There were photos, blurry black and white images of a massive object buried beneath the ice. It looked like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, a perfectly round disc, half submerged in the Antarctic snow. Some of the photos had people standing around the object, wearing thick, insulated suits, but their faces were obscured by masks and helmets. And then there were the coordinates, a long string of numbers scrolled on the back of one of the photos. Your assignment is to make sure this never reaches the public. The driver's voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script. Whatever you think you saw in these pictures, you didn't. And if you say otherwise, you'll disappear just like everything else. I glanced up from the photos, heart pounding. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to know what this thing was and why they needed me to cover it up. But something about the driver's tone made it clear that wasn't an option. Instead, I just nodded, playing along. The SUV weaved through the narrow streets of Buenos Aires before pulling up to a private airstrip. There, waiting for me on the tarmac, was a small private jet, the kind of jet you only see in movies, or like billionaires' Instagram posts. The door was already open, and I could see two more men dressed in black standing just inside, waiting. "Don't ask questions," the driver said, as if reading my mind. "Do what you're told, and you'll be fine." With that, I grabbed my bag, tucked the photos into my jacket, and made my way up the steps of the jet. The interior was exactly what I expected: sleek, cold, sterile. There was no one else on board, except for the two men who looked like they were straight out of a government manual on how to be intimidating. No sooner had I taken my seat than the jet roared to life and lifted off. I had no clue where we were headed, but the way the windows immediately frosted over told me we were heading into some seriously cold territory. I sat in silence, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline, trying to make sense of what was happening. And that's when the first crack in the official story appeared. The man across from me leaned forward, just slightly, and whispered, "They don't know what it is, you know." I blinked, unsure if he was talking to me. His eyes didn't leave mine, and for a moment, there was something there. A flash of fear, or maybe doubt. They sent you because they need someone disposable, someone who won't be missed if things go sideways. His words sent a chill down my spine, colder than the ice we were flying over. I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, The other man, the one sitting near the cockpit, shot him a look. That was enough to shut him up. He sat back, staring blankly ahead like nothing had happened. It was then I realized that whatever was waiting for me in Antarctica, it wasn't just a cover-up job. It was something far more dangerous, and I was being thrown into the middle of it with no clue what I was up against. The flight dragged on, and I dozed off somewhere over the ocean. When I woke up, it was to the harsh sound of wind howling outside. We had landed in Antarctica. As I stepped out of the jet, the cold hit me like a slap in the face. The ground was nothing but a frozen wasteland, stretching out in every direction. But that wasn't the worst part. Off in the distance, barely visible through the swirling snow, was a massive military camp, surrounded by high fences and floodlights. And just beyond it, under the thick layer of ice, I could make out the outline of something big, the disc from the photos. I was here, and whatever they needed me to do, whatever they were trying to hide, it was buried right under my feet. The cold in Antarctica is unlike anything I've ever felt. It doesn't just sting your skin, it cuts through you, bone deep. The wind was a constant scream in my ears as I stepped off the plane, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Two men in black coats, both of them wearing dark sunglasses despite the dull light, were waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Without a word, they motioned for me to follow. I didn't ask where we were going. I already knew. The military camp I'd seen from the plane loomed in the distance, a stark reminder of why I was here. As we trudged through the snow, I kept my eyes on the ground, trying not to think too hard about what I'd gotten myself into. The air smelled sterile, too clean, like the cold had wiped away any trace of life. Everything felt off. When we reached the camp, it was bigger than I had imagined. The fences were topped with razor wire, and I could see armed guards patrolling in pairs, their faces obscured by heavy hoods and masks. There were no flags, no insignias, nothing to suggest which government or organization was running the operation. Just a series of low, rectangular buildings and tents, all positioned around a central structure, a massive hangar with a reinforced roof. The hangar was where the object, the disc, was hidden, covered by layers of ice and secrecy. The two men led me through a side gate, flashing what looked like black keycards at a guard. The gate clicked open without a sound, and we were inside. As we walked through the camp, I noticed the soldiers were all business. No one talked. No one made eye contact. It was like they were trained not to see each other, like every person here was just another cog in the machine. They led me into one of the smaller buildings, which, from the outside, looked like a standard prefab unit, but inside, it was all high-tech, cold metal walls, fluorescent lights, and a control room full of monitors and equipment I couldn't begin to understand. It smelled like antiseptic and ozone, like the air itself had been scrubbed clean of anything natural. A man was waiting for me. He looked different from the others. No sunglasses, no mask. His hair was close cropped, and he had a sharp, angular face with eyes that seemed too cold for the warm fluorescent glow of the room. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. I already knew he was the one in charge. "We've been expecting you," he said, his voice flat, emotionless, like everything else here. He gestured for me to sit in a metal chair facing the monitors. "Your job is simple. Contain the narrative." He tapped a few keys on one of the consoles, and the larger screen flickered to life. The blurry photos I had seen in the envelope back in Buenos Aires appeared, but this time there were new ones, clearer, more detailed. It wasn't just a disc. It was something more, something alive. The ice had been hiding the full truth. The photos showed strange markings on the surface of the object, patterns that didn't look natural, geometric, almost like hieroglyphs, but nothing I'd ever seen before. One image caught my eye in particular. A long crack had appeared on the side of the disc, and something was spilling out, some kind of black, viscous liquid. And near the crack, something else, a shape, humanoid, but not quite human. My heart started to pound in my chest. I couldn't look away. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The man in charge didn't answer at first. He just stared at the screen, his face unreadable. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Classified. Your job is not to ask questions. Your job is to make sure no one else does." He turned back to me, his cold eyes locking onto mine. "There's been a breach. The discovery of this object was leaked to certain fringe groups online. People who spend too much time looking for things they shouldn't." His eyes flicked to me for a split second, like he was making a point. "Your expertise in navigating the deep web is why you're here." He handed me a small tablet. On the screen were dozens of web addresses, dark web forums, anonymous blogs, conspiracy sites. All of them had one thing in common. They were talking about the object beneath the ice, the photos, the discovery. They were speculating about what it meant, some of them even claiming to have inside sources. "These need to disappear," the man said, "and you're going to make that happen." I stared at the list, my throat dry. This was bigger than I'd ever imagined. Covering up some conspiracy theory was one thing, but this was a full-on cover-up of something otherworldly, something that could change everything if the truth got out, and I was supposed to silence the people who knew about it. "You can't cover this up forever," I said, my voice shaky. "Someone's going to talk." "They always do," the man said, unbothered. "That's why you're not the first one we brought here, and you won't be the last." He stood up and walked over to a wall-mounted console, pressing a button. The monitors switched to live footage from inside the hangar. My stomach dropped. Inside the hangar, teams of workers in full hazmat suits were gathered around the object. The disc, now fully uncovered, was far larger than I'd thought, at least the size of a football field. The crack in its side had widened, and that same black liquid was pooling on the ground beneath it, steaming in the cold. But that wasn't what made me feel sick. It was what was moving inside. In the shadows of the crack, barely visible through the haze of steam, something was shifting. A long serpentine shape, slick with the black liquid, slithered across the ice. It was massive, coiling in and out of the crack like it was testing its surroundings. The workers were trying to contain it, but the thing moved too fast, too fluidly. I couldn't tell if it was alive in the way we understand life or something else entirely. My mind raced. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a containment. Something had been found in that ice. Something old, something dangerous, and now it was waking up. What is that thing?" I asked, my voice cracking with fear. The man turned off the monitors, his face still unreadable. "You don't need to know. All you need to do is ensure the story stays buried." He leaned in close, his eyes narrowing. "People will die for this. That's the cost of keeping the world safe from the truth. And if you fail, you'll die too." The air felt heavy around me. I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was in the most remote, inhospitable place on Earth, surrounded by soldiers and scientists who knew more than they would ever tell me. I had walked into a nightmare, and there was no waking up. "We'll give you access to the necessary resources," the man continued, pulling out a small card and sliding it across the table to me. "Erase the digital evidence. Silence anyone who talks. And if you ever think of trying to leak this yourself, we'll know. We'll always know." I stared at the card, feeling the weight of the situation settle in my gut. I wasn't just a part of a cover-up anymore. I was trapped in it. As the man left the room, I sat there, staring at the blank monitors, the thing beneath the ice. It was awake now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already in way over my head. For the next few days, I stayed confined in that freezing metal room, the tablet in front of me, the list of websites waiting to be wiped clean. It should have been straightforward, something I'd done 100 times before. Track the sites, erase the data, scare the admins into silence. But nothing about this felt right. There was something bigger lurking beneath the surface of this operation, something they weren't telling me. And that thing in the ice, I couldn't get the image out of my head. Every so often, I'd hear muffled voices outside the door, hurried footsteps, or the low hum of machinery I couldn't identify. The cam was buzzing with activity, but no one talked to me. I was just the guy cleaning up their mess on the internet, the guy they could discard once I'd done my part. But the thing is, erasing information on the deep web isn't as easy as people think. Sure, you can take down a site, wipe a server, but the truth spreads like wildfire. The more you try to suppress it, the more people get curious. And these sites weren't just random conspiracy blogs anymore. They were linked. People had seen the photos. They were talking. As I worked, piecing together the web of forums and chat rooms, discussing the Antarctica incident, a pattern started to emerge. A few users, anonymous but clearly more informed than the average keyboard warrior, were sharing detailed information. They weren't just speculating. They knew something, coordinates, dates, descriptions of the object that were eerily close to the ones I'd seen in the hangar. These weren't just conspiracy theorists. These were insiders, people who had access to things they shouldn't have. And as I dug deeper, I found something that made my blood run cold. On one of the smaller, more obscure forums, someone had posted a short video. It was grainy, filmed at a distance, but it was unmistakable. The object, the disc, was visible in the footage, and standing next to it were the hazmat-suited figures from the hangar. The angle was wrong though. This wasn't filmed from inside the camp. It was from outside, like someone had managed to sneak close enough to get footage without being detected. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. Someone had gotten close, too close, and they'd recorded it. If this got out, if it spread beyond the dark web, this whole operation would collapse, and I didn't want to think about what would happen to me if I failed to contain it. Without thinking, I grabbed the black flip phone and dialed the number I'd been given. It rang twice before the same cold voice from the hangar picked up. "Report." "I found a video," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's from outside the camp. Someone's been filming the object. It's spreading." There was silence on the other end, long enough that I wondered if they'd hung up. But then the man's voice came back, harder, colder. "Delete it. Track the source." "I'm trying," I said, swallowing hard. But this wasn't just some random person. They're using high-level encryption. It's going to take time. "You don't have time," the voice snapped. "We're already seeing activity in the field." Unauthorized personnel are closing in. If they breach the perimeter, he didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I knew what he meant. Whatever was in that object, whatever they were trying to contain, it wasn't just a threat to the secrecy of the operation. It was a threat to everything, and they couldn't risk letting it slip through their fingers. I worked faster, hands shaking, as I tracked the video's origin. The IP address led me to a small town in Alaska, but it was a dead end, bounced through dozens of proxies. Whoever had filmed this knew exactly what they were doing. They'd been careful, but I was better. After hours of chasing digital trails, I finally traced the video back to a single user, a hacker known only as Owl. I'd heard the name before, whispered in dark web circles. Owl was a ghost, a legend, someone who specialized in uncovering buried secrets and leaking them to the highest bidder. No one knew Owl's real identity, or even if they were a single person, but now they were my problem. I pulled up the forum Owl had been active on and sent them a direct message. I didn't expect a response. Hell, I didn't even know if they were still online. But to my surprise, within minutes, a reply popped up on my screen. "You found me." My heart raced as I typed back, "You need to stop. You don't know what you're dealing with." The reply came almost instantly. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with." "Do you?" I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. How much did they know? How deep had they dug? Before I could respond, another message appeared. "They're lying to you. It's not what they say it is." "What do you mean?" I typed, trying to keep the panic from showing in my words. There was a long pause before the next message came through, and when it did, it sent a chill down my spine. "The object isn't just a ship. It's alive." I sat there, staring at the screen, unable to process what I'd just read. Alive? How could that be possible? I thought about the thing I'd seen on the monitor, the black serpentine shape slithering out of the crack in the disc, the way it moved, like it was testing its surroundings, like it was aware. Before I could type a response, the flip phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "We know about Owl," the voice said without preamble. "They're closer than you think, and they're not alone." The line went dead. I stood up, pacing the small room, my heart racing. This was spiraling out of control. I was supposed to be in charge of covering up a leak, but now it felt like the leak was consuming everything. Owl knew more than I did. They weren't just trying to expose the object. They were trying to expose the truth. I had to stop them. If I didn't, the entire world would know what was really buried beneath the ice. And if what they said was true, that the object was alive, then maybe this wasn't just about a cover-up. Maybe this was about survival. Before I could think too hard about what I was doing, I sent another message to Owl. "Meet me." The response was immediate. "You know where." I didn't know where, but I had a feeling they were already close. Too close. That night, I couldn't sleep. The howling wind outside felt like it was calling to something deep beneath the ice, something that had been waiting for too long. The camp was quiet, eerily quiet, like the soldiers and scientists knew something was coming, but weren't ready to face it. As dawn broke, I got the call I had been dreading. The object, it had started to change. The crack in its side was widening, and the black liquid was spreading faster than they could contain it. Whatever was inside that thing, it wasn't sleeping anymore. I grabbed my gear, the tablet, and the flip phone, and headed to the hangar. The air felt heavy with tension, like the whole place was holding its breath. When I reached the hangar, I could hear the low hum of machinery and see the frantic movement of workers in hazmat suits trying to reinforce the containment. But I knew, deep down, it wasn't enough. Whatever was in that object had woken up, and Owl was right. It wasn't just a ship. It was something far worse, something alive. And now, I had to face it. The hangar was a scene straight out of a nightmare. The lights inside flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the slick, frozen floor. The air smelled metallic, like ozone mixed with something rotting, something old. The giant disk, once half buried under the ice, now stood exposed, towering over everything around it. And that crack in the side, it was no longer just a fracture. It had become a gaping wound. Thick, black liquid oozed from the opening, pooling around the base of the object, seeping into the snow and steaming in the frigid air. The ground around it pulsed with an unnatural heat, and the liquid moved like it had a mind of its own, flowing in strange, erratic patterns. And within that liquid, I saw shapes, twisting, writhing, shifting in and out of view, things that looked almost human, but weren't. I stood there paralyzed, watching as hazmat-suited workers frantically set up barriers, spraying the ground with chemicals that did nothing to stop the spread. The liquid, whatever it was alive, and it was growing. Behind me, the man in charge appeared, flanked by 2 soldiers. His face was as cold as ever, but now there was something else in his eyes. Fear. "Containment's failing," he said through gritted teeth, barely acknowledging me. "We need to escalate. Get the teams in place. Shut down all communications." I swallowed hard. "You think shutting down the internet is going to fix this?" He shot me a look, his icy eyes narrowing. "Your job is to deal with people. My job is to deal with whatever this is." He gestured toward the object, where the black liquid had now formed tendrils, creeping toward the workers. One of them stumbled back, screaming, as the liquid wrapped around his leg, dragging him into the mass. I turned away as his screams were cut short. The man in charge didn't flinch. "Get the cleanup teams," he ordered the soldiers. "We're shutting it all down." I wanted to ask what he meant by that, but I already knew. They weren't just shutting down the camp. They were going to bury it, wipe it from the map. If this thing got out, if the world found out what was really under the ice, it would be chaos. Governments, scientists, the media, no one would be able to contain the panic. But as I watched the soldiers run to their posts, I realized something far worse. This wasn't just about covering up the truth. This was about survival. Whatever had been hidden here for centuries was waking up, and no amount of military firepower was going to stop it. The black flip phone buzzed in my pocket, yanking me out of my thoughts. I fumbled for it, my hand shaking, and saw a new message from Owl. "You're too late." My heart pounded as I typed back. "What do you mean? Where are you? We tried to warn you." Before I could respond, the tablet on the desk next to me flickered to life. A message popped up on the screen, a live feed from one of the cameras outside the camp. The footage showed a group of figures moving toward the perimeter. At first, I thought it was more soldiers, but something was off. These people weren't dressed in military gear. They were wearing ordinary clothes, some bundled in thick parkas, others in little more than winter coats. Civilians, but they were moving like they had a purpose. "They're already here," the voice behind me said. I spun around. One of the soldiers had entered the room, his face pale. "The perimeter's been breached. we've got unauthorized civilians heading straight for the hangar. We tried to stop them, but they're not responding." The man in charge cursed under his breath and grabbed a radio. "All units to the perimeter. Stop anyone from getting in." I barely heard him. My attention was locked on the screen. The figures were getting closer, trudging through the snow in a straight line, their eyes fixed on the object, like they were being drawn to it. And then I realized they were. The object was calling to them, pulling them in. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the hangar, making everyone jump. The crack came from the disc. The crack in its surface was now a jagged, open wound, wide enough to see inside. And what I saw inside made my blood turn to ice. There were more shapes, dozens, maybe hundreds, slithering just beneath the surface. Dark, oily figures, barely visible through the steam and liquid, their movements slow and deliberate. They weren't human. They weren't even close. They were something else, something older, something that had been waiting for this moment for God knows how long. The air around me buzzed with static, the lights flickering more erratically. And then, from deep within the object, a low, resonant hum began to build. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration that I felt in my bones, a deep, primal frequency that made every hair on my body stand on end. "Get out," I whispered, backing away from the object. But no one was listening. The workers, the soldiers, they were all frozen, staring at the object as the hum grew louder, shaking the very ground beneath us. And then, it happened. The disc split open with a sound like tearing metal, the crack widening until the entire surface was nothing but jagged shards. Black liquid poured out in waves, spilling onto the ground, surging toward us. And from the depths of the object, something massive began to emerge. It was a shape, unlike anything I could describe, twisted and fluid, like it didn't quite belong in this reality. It moved with an unnatural grace, its body shifting in and out of focus, like it was both there and not there at the same time. Tendrils of darkness snaked out from its form, touching everything around it, freezing the air as they passed. And then, it looked at us. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt it. It wasn't just seeing us, it was knowing us. Every fear, every secret, every dark thought I'd ever had, it was all laid bare before that thing, and I could feel its hunger. The camp erupted into chaos. Alarms blared, soldiers shouted orders, gunfire erupted, but it was all pointless. The creature moved through the hangar like it was untouchable, its presence warping the air around it. The soldiers' bullets were useless, disappearing into the black mass like they were firing into smoke. I ran. I don't remember deciding to run, but my legs carried me out of the hangar and into the freezing cold, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I could hear the screams of the soldiers, the crackle of gunfire, and the strange bone-rattling hum of the creature as it devoured everything in its path. The civilians, the ones I'd seen on the camera feed, were already at the perimeter, and they weren't stopping. They moved in perfect sync, their eyes glazed over, completely oblivious to the chaos erupting around them. They weren't running away from the creature. They were walking toward it. And I knew, in that moment, that it wasn't just waking up. It was calling to them, drawing them in, and soon it would spread beyond this camp, beyond Antarctica. I stumbled through the snow, my mind racing. There was no way to stop this, no way to cover it up. This wasn't just some government secret. This was something far older, far more dangerous than anything we could ever understand. and it was spreading. As I reached the edge of the camp, the wind howling in my ears, the black flip phone buzzed in my pocket one last time. I pulled it out, barely able to see the screen through the snow and my shaking hands. One final message from Owl. "You can't stop it." And I knew they were right. The truth had been buried beneath the ice for centuries, hidden away, waiting. But now, it was free. And whatever it was only just beginning. I took a job as a weather station technician in Antarctica. I'm not alone out here. Alright, so this is one of those stories where I still have a hard time believing everything that happened. Even just typing this out feels surreal, but I need to get it off my chest because, well, I don't know how else to make sense of what I've been through. So, here it goes. About 6 months ago, I got offered a job that sounded too good to be true. I was in between gigs, scraping by on freelance work, and honestly, I was desperate for something steady. One morning, I was scrolling through some job boards, and this weird ad caught my eye. Weather station technician needed, Antarctica, high pay, long-term contract, serious inquiries only. Now, I've always had this fascination with the idea of just disappearing. Not in a morbid way or anything, but in the sense of just unplugging from society for a while. No phone, no noise, no people. So, Antarctica. Hell yeah. I figured I could handle some isolation if it meant a hefty paycheck at the end. Besides, it seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime kind of deal, and I needed the money. I sent in my application without a second thought. To my surprise, I got a response almost immediately. I was scheduled for an interview the next day. The weird thing was, the interview wasn't over Zoom, or even a phone call. It was all done through this super secure encrypted chat service. Seems strange, but whatever. I was intrigued. I logged on, and this guy named Frank started messaging me. Frank didn't ask the usual interview questions. He didn't care about my technical background or my experience. All he asked was, "How do you feel about being alone for extended periods?" I told him it wouldn't be a problem. After all, the whole point of taking this job was to get away from the world for a while. He responded with a simple, "Good," and within minutes, I had the job offer in my inbox. 3 weeks later, I was on a cargo plane headed to one of the most remote weather stations in Antarctica. It's a tiny place called Station Delta 6, nestled in the middle of this endless white wasteland. No towns, no research bases, nothing but ice and snow for miles. I'd be working there completely solo, keeping the equipment running and recording weather data. Occasionally, I'd transmit it back to HQ through some satellite uplink, but that was about the extent of my human contact. There was something both exciting and eerie about it. On the plane ride over, the realization of just how isolated I'd be really started to sink in. But, weirdly, that's what I was looking forward to the most. When I finally arrived, the station was exactly what I expected. Small, cold, and quiet. It was just one main building, with a few small outbuildings for storage. The living quarters were basic, but comfortable enough. There was a generator to keep the heat going, a well-stocked pantry, and more than enough supplies to last me the year. I didn't mind the simplicity. In fact, I was kind of looking forward to the routine. The job itself wasn't hard, mostly maintenance, keeping the instruments calibrated and sending weather reports. I figured it would be peaceful, maybe even kind of meditative in a weird way. Just me, the cold, and the quiet. The first couple of weeks went by without a hitch. I got into a rhythm. Wake up, check the equipment, jot down the readings, eat, sleep, repeat. It was monotonous, sure, but it wasn't bad. At night, I'd sit by the small window in the living quarters and watch the sky, the stars clearer than I'd ever seen in my life. I even started to enjoy the total isolation. But then, little things started to happen. It began with the noises. The wind in Antarctica is brutal, howling constantly. But after a while, you get used to it. You start to tune it out. But one night, about 3 weeks in, I heard something different. It was just past midnight, and I was lying in bed when I heard this faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was the ice cracking or maybe some loose equipment outside. But it was rhythmic, like someone was knocking softly on the wall. I got up, pulled on my jacket, and went to check outside. Nothing. Everything was exactly as it should be. No signs of anyone or anything around. I shrugged it off as my mind playing tricks on me. I mean, the isolation can do weird things to your head, right? But after that night, the tapping kept happening. Every night, around the same time, it would start. A soft, consistent knock that would go on for hours, always just faint enough that I couldn't quite place it. I tried to ignore it, but it was like this itch in the back of my mind that I couldn't scratch. I even checked the walls, thinking maybe it was some kind of structural issue, but everything seemed solid. That's when things started to escalate. About a month into my stay, I went out to check one of the weather instruments, which was located a little way from the main building. It was about a 15-minute walk through the snow, nothing too intense. But when I got there, I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the snow. Now, these weren't my footprints. They were fresh, and they didn't lead to the station. They were just there, like someone had walked up to the instrument, stood there for a while, and then disappeared. No trail leading away, just two deep imprints in the snow, as if someone had been standing there watching. I felt this cold wave of dread wash over me. I looked around, but I was alone. At least, I thought I was. It was broad daylight, and I could see for miles in every direction. Nothing but snow and ice. So where the hell had the footprints come from? I snapped a picture of them on my phone, just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. I even sent it to Frank, back at HQ. His response was short. "We'll look into it. Keep doing your job." That was it. No explanation, no reassurance. Just keep working. I tried to brush it off. Maybe there was some logical explanation, a trick of the light or wind patterns I didn't understand. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out here, that something or someone was watching me. And then, a few nights later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the station. Alright, so like I said, the weird stuff had already started to get to me. The knocking, the footprints. None of it made sense, but I was trying to rationalize it, telling myself it was just the isolation messing with my head. But then came the footsteps. It was late again, middle of the night, maybe around 2 or 3 a.m. The kind of cold where even breathing feels like shards of glass scraping your throat. I'd been tossing and turning, struggling to sleep, when I heard it. Crunch. It was soft at first, like someone stepping lightly in fresh snow. At first, I thought maybe it was just the wind again, or maybe the building settling under the cold. But no, this was different. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like boots trudging through the snow right outside the station. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It wasn't just random noise. It was coming closer. My heart was pounding in my chest as I sat up in bed, straining to hear through the layers of insulation and thick walls. Whoever, or whatever, was out there was taking slow, measured steps, getting closer and closer to the door. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but what was I supposed to do? I was in the middle of nowhere, hundreds of miles from the nearest human. Nobody could be out here. But the footsteps kept coming. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, just listening. It felt like forever. Then they stopped, right at the front door. I could hear my own breathing, shaky and uneven, as I stared at the door from across the room. Every nerve in my body was on edge, waiting for something, anything, to happen. I don't know what I was expecting. A knock, the door handle turning, or maybe something worse. But then, silence. Minutes passed. I didn't move. My brain was trying to make sense of what I just heard. I even thought about grabbing the little emergency radio I had stashed away, calling HQ or something. But what would I say? Hey, I think I heard footsteps in a place where no one else exists. I'd sound insane. Hell, maybe I was going insane. Eventually, I worked up the courage to get out of bed. I grabbed the small flashlight I kept by the nightstand and tiptoed toward the door. My hand hovered over the handle, and I paused for a second. What if there was something, or someone, on the other side? But I couldn't just leave it alone. I had to know. I flicked on the flashlight, took a deep breath, and slowly cracked the door open. Nothing. I stepped outside into the freezing night air, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I scanned the area. No signs of movement, no footprints, nothing. Just the same endless stretch of snow and ice. But I know what I heard. Someone, or something, had been out here. I stood there for a while, just staring out into the empty landscape, trying to calm the rising panic in my chest. My breath was fogging up in front of me, and the silence was deafening. It was like the whole world had been muted, and I was the only thing left making any noise. After what felt like an eternity, I went back inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound made me jump, and I kept expecting to hear the footsteps again, but they never came. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that maybe it had just been a dream, or maybe the wind had somehow sounded like footsteps. But deep down, I knew better. I knew what I had heard, and I knew I wasn't alone out here. I went about my routine, checking the equipment and logging the weather data like nothing was wrong. But the whole time, I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was this intense, almost physical sensation, like someone's eyes were boring into the back of my head. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, but I was always alone. That afternoon, I decided to check the perimeter again. I needed to know if there was any sign that someone, or something, had been near the station. Maybe I had missed something last night in the dark. I bundled up and headed outside, my breath freezing in the air as I made my way around the building. The snow crunched under my boots as I circled the station, but just like the night before, there was nothing. No footprints, no disturbances. Everything was as it should be, except for one thing. There, on the side of the station, just below the small window near my bedroom, was a mark. It was faint, barely noticeable at first, but when I got closer, I saw it clearly. A smear of something dark, like oil or soot, streaked across the white metal siding. I knelt down to get a better look. my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't oil. It wasn't soot. It was blood. It wasn't much. Just a small streak, like someone had brushed against the wall while walking by. But it was fresh, and it definitely hadn't been there the day before. I stared at the smear for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Where had it come from? Who had left it? The only other living creatures out here were the occasional birds, and they sure as hell weren't making footprints or bleeding on my station. Something was out here. Something was watching me. And now it had left a mark. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread creeping up my spine as I headed back inside. I kept telling myself it didn't make sense. Maybe there was some logical explanation. A bird, a freak accident. But nothing added up. That night, I locked every door and window. I even pushed a chair up against the front door, just to be safe. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone, or something, standing right outside the window, watching me. But the next night, the footsteps came back. I barely slept after the second night of footsteps. The tapping had been bad enough, but hearing those deliberate, heavy steps outside my door, that was something else entirely. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear them again, crunching in the snow, stopping just outside, like whoever, or whatever, was out there knew exactly where I was. I kept the flashlight next to me, but it was more of a comfort thing. If someone wanted to get in, a flashlight wasn't going to stop them. The following day, things got worse. It started with the equipment. As part of my daily routine, I had to check the sensors and transmit the collected weather data back to HQ using this old, bulky satellite uplink. It wasn't fancy, but it worked well enough. Except that morning, it didn't. The screen was dead. The entire system was down. I spent the next couple of hours troubleshooting it, trying to figure out if it was a hardware issue or just some glitch with the satellite. But no matter what I did, nothing brought it back online. Without that connection, I was completely cut off. No messages in or out, no weather reports, nothing. The isolation had gone from voluntary to terrifyingly real. I shot an email to Frank using the emergency radio system. It was slow and clunky, but it was my last link to the outside world. I explained the problem and asked for help, expecting a response like before. Quick, concise, and dismissive. But this time, nothing. Hours went by, and I didn't hear a thing from Frank. I started to wonder if HQ had just written me off, like I was some disposable part of the operation. Maybe this was normal out here, and they expected me to just power through. Maybe I was losing it, and they knew I'd figure it out eventually. But something told me this was different. Later that afternoon, I went back outside to check the outbuildings. I figured maybe some of the wiring had been damaged by the cold, or an animal had gotten into one of the cables. It was a long shot, but I had to do something to feel like I had control over the situation. The last thing I wanted was to just sit inside and wait. The sun was low in the sky, casting this eerie orange glow over the endless expanse of ice. It should have been beautiful, but all I could feel was dread. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I made my way toward the outbuilding that housed the generator, I saw something in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, some kind of shadow cast by the setting sun. But the closer I got, the clearer it became. There was a figure standing on the horizon. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing. The figure was far enough away that I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of a person, tall, thin, standing perfectly still against the white expanse of snow. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it didn't disappear. They were just standing there, staring at me. I couldn't see a face, but I knew. I felt their eyes on me, watching, waiting. For a second, I considered shouting, waving, anything to see if they would respond, but something deep inside told me not to. It was like my instincts were screaming at me to get back inside. Slowly, I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept my eyes on the figure, afraid that if I looked away, they would move. They'd get closer, but they never did. They just stood there, watching. When I finally made it back to the station, I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it tight. My breath was coming in short, panicked bursts, and my mind was racing with questions. Who the hell was out there? How had they survived this long in the freezing cold? And why the hell were they just watching me? I pressed myself against the door, listening, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no movement. Just the howling wind outside and the creaking of the station's walls. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus on my work, couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. I kept looking out the window, expecting to see the figure again, but they never showed. It was almost worse, knowing they were out there somewhere, waiting. Then, one night, something happened that still gives me chills. I had fallen asleep at my desk, exhausted from a combination of anxiety and sleep deprivation. When I woke up, it was pitch black outside. The only light came from the faint glow of the computer screen, which was still dead from the satellite malfunction. I stretched, rubbing my eyes, when I noticed something. There was a faint crackling sound coming from the emergency radio. It was subtle, barely audible at first, like static interference. I frowned, leaning in closer. The radio had been silent since I sent that message to Frank. I hadn't heard a thing from HQ in days, but this wasn't HQ. It was something else. I adjusted the dial, trying to clear up the signal, and the static grew louder, more intense. Then, through the crackling, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a voice. At first, it was hard to make out. The words were garbled, broken up by bursts of static, but the tone was unmistakable. It was slow, deliberate, almost like a chant. I turned the volume up, pressing the radio closer to my ear, trying to make sense of it. He's watching. Don't look. Find you. My heart was racing as I strained to understand the words. The voice was faint, but it felt wrong, like it wasn't meant for me to hear. I sat there, frozen, listening as the voice faded in and out, repeating the same fragmented phrases over and over again. He's coming. No escape. I yanked the radio plug out of the wall, cutting the signal. The room was plunged into silence, but the weight of what I'd just heard hung in the air like a thick fog. I sat there in the dark, my mind racing, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I had no idea who or what was broadcasting that signal, but I knew one thing for sure. Whoever was out there wasn't just watching me. They were waiting for me. And now, I wasn't sure how much longer I had before they made their move. The hours after hearing that voice on the radio were some of the longest of my life. I sat there in the dark, trying to convince myself that I'd misheard it, that it was just some weird interference, or maybe even my own mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That voice, those fragmented, broken words, they were meant for me. It took everything I had not to completely lose it. I had already started hearing things, seeing things that didn't make sense. The footprints, the figure in the snow, the bloodstains on the side of the station. It all felt like a slow build-up to something worse, something I wasn't ready for. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I'd hear the voice from the radio in my head, echoing like a distant whisper. He's coming. No escape. Don't look. I spent most of the night sitting by the window, staring out into the endless darkness. My flashlight sat beside me, but I knew it wouldn't do much good. Not against whatever was out there. At some point, probably around 3 or 4 in the morning, I saw it. A light. At first, I thought it was a trick of the eyes. Maybe my tired brain was hallucinating, desperate for some kind of answer to the madness that had taken hold of my life. But the longer I stared, the more real it became. It was faint, just a small, flickering light on the horizon. At first, it looked like a distant star, shimmering against the black sky, but it was too low for that, way too low. The light was moving, bobbing slowly in and out of sight, like someone was carrying a lantern through the snow. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I leaned closer to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. My brain raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was another outpost, a rescue party. But that didn't make sense. I was too far out, and no one from HQ had mentioned any nearby stations. The light kept moving, slowly, deliberately, growing brighter as it came closer. My heart started to pound in my chest as the familiar feeling of being watched crept up my spine. I grabbed the flashlight, holding it tightly in my hand, as if it would somehow protect me. Then, suddenly, the light stopped. It didn't blink out. It just stopped moving. I squinted, trying to make out any details, but it was still too far away to see anything clearly. All I could do was wait. Wait and watch. I don't know how long I stared at that light, but eventually, something started to change. It took me a moment to realize it, but the air around me felt different. Thicker, heavy, like the atmosphere itself was pressing down on me. My chest felt tight, my skin prickling with cold sweat. And then, the light flickered again, but this time, something else appeared next to it. A figure. It was the same as before. The tall, thin outline of a person standing perfectly still in the snow. The light, in their hand, cast long, jagged shadows across the ground, making it impossible to see any details. But I knew it was the same figure. The one that had been watching me. The one that had left the footprints. The one I couldn't shake, no matter how much I tried. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I backed away from the window. The figure hadn't moved, but it didn't need to. It was there. It had always been there, waiting. The radio crackled to life again, but this time, the voice was louder, clearer. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Don't let him in." I stared at the radio in horror, the words repeating over and over, like a broken record. The voice was desperate now, panicked. I couldn't tell if it was warning me, or if it was too late for that. "Don't let him in. Don't look. Don't look." I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't move. I couldn't. The fear had completely paralyzed me. I was alone, stranded, with no way out, no one to call for help. The figure hadn't moved from the horizon, but I could feel it, feel him, inching closer with every passing second. I didn't realize I had been holding my breath until I felt my lungs burn for air. Gasping, I tore my eyes away from the radio and forced myself to move. I grabbed the small hunting knife. I'd brought with me, more for peace of mind than anything else, and bolted toward the door. I needed to see for myself. I needed to make sure the figure hadn't moved, that it wasn't closer. I threw on my coat and pushed open the front door, the frigid air biting at my skin as I stepped outside. The wind whipped around me, sharp and relentless, but I ignored it. My eyes were locked on the horizon. The light was gone. My heart skipped a beat as I scanned the darkness. The figure, he, was gone too. There was nothing but the empty stretch of snow and ice as far as the eye could see. I took a shaky step forward, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air. My mind was racing, trying to figure out where they had gone. Had they disappeared? Had they left? Or worse, were they closer than I thought? The only sound was the wind howling around me, the snow crunching beneath my boots. But then, just as I was about to turn back inside, I heard something. Footsteps. But this time, they weren't coming from the distance. They were right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my hand, but there was nothing. No figure, no light, just the endless empty snow stretching out behind me. But I knew what I heard. The crunch of snow under heavy boots, deliberate and slow, just like the first time. I was no longer alone out here. With my heart racing and my skin crawling, I turned and bolted back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lock it. I stumbled back toward the center of the room, panting, trying to calm myself down. That's when I heard it. The knocking. It wasn't like the rhythmic tapping from before. This was louder, more forceful. Someone was knocking on the door. I stared at the door, every muscle in my body frozen. The knocking continued, slow and steady, like they had all the time in the world. The radio crackled again, the voice returning, louder than ever. Don't look. Don't let him in. Don't look. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it reverberating through the walls, echoing in my chest. My hand tightened around the knife, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. Not against this. The knocking stopped. For a brief, terrifying moment, the station was completely silent. No wind, no footsteps, nothing. I thought maybe it was over. Maybe the figure had given up. But then, I heard it. The door handle turned. The moment that handle turned, every ounce of courage I had left drained out of me. I stood there, frozen in place, clutching the knife so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped, paralyzed by fear, as the door handle clicked softly, like whoever was on the other side was toying with me. It didn't open all the way at first, just a slight crack, enough for the freezing wind to slip through and send a shiver down my spine. I could see the snow whipping around outside, but the figure, the one I knew was there, was hidden in the shadows. I didn't dare move. The door creaked open wider. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. The figure, tall, gaunt, almost inhuman in the way it moved, stood just beyond the threshold, its face still obscured by the darkness. But I could see its outline now, clearer than ever. A man, maybe? No, something that looked like a man. The shape was wrong, like it didn't quite fit in its own skin. The knife in my hand suddenly felt useless, like I was holding a twig. I backed up slowly, trying to put as much distance between myself and the door as possible. But the figure didn't step inside, not yet. Instead, it spoke. The voice that came from it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't deep or monstrous. It was almost normal, calm even. that made it worse somehow. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, its voice low and deliberate, cutting through the wind like a knife. "You weren't supposed to be here." I could barely breathe. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what the hell it was talking about. My job? The station? Why wouldn't I be here? But I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat was so tight, I thought I might choke. The figure took a slow, deliberate step forward. Its foot crunched in the snow, just beyond the door frame, but it still didn't come inside. It was like there was something stopping it, holding it back, some kind of invisible barrier keeping it at bay. "You're not the first," it said, its voice a little quieter now, almost a whisper. "You won't be the last." That's when it hit me. The others. I hadn't thought about it before, but something clicked in my head. I wasn't the first person to take this job. I had never bothered to ask Frank, or whoever was in charge, what happened to the previous technicians stationed here. I just assumed they'd finished their contracts and moved on. But now, hearing this thing speak, it felt like the pieces were starting to come together. What happened to them? I took another step back, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the knife. The figure stayed just outside, its face still hidden in the shadows. "They didn't make it," the voice said, almost as if it was reading my thoughts. "They couldn't leave." The radio crackled to life again, the static filling the room like an electric storm. And through the crackling, the same desperate voice from before came through, loud and clear. "Run! Leave! Before it's too late." But I couldn't. There was nowhere to go. The nearest outpost was hundreds of miles away, across some of the most dangerous terrain on the planet. Even if I tried to escape, the cold would get me long before I reached safety. The figure knew that. It knew I was trapped. "You belong to it now," the figure said, taking another slow step forward. "Just like the others." My mind was spinning. The others. I kept thinking about the footprints in the snow, the blood on the side of the building, the malfunctioning equipment. Had they all been signs, warnings left by those who had come before me? But why? Why hadn't anyone said anything? Why hadn't HQ told me? The door creaked again as the figure stepped back. The wind howled through the open doorway, filling the small station with the biting chill of the Antarctic night. But the figure didn't come inside. It stood there, watching, waiting, almost like it was inviting me to follow. The radio crackled again, the voice growing more urgent now. "You have to go. Don't let it take you." Run, my instincts kicked in. I don't know if it was the voice or the terror finally catching up to me, but something inside snapped. I bolted toward the back of the station, throwing open the door to the small storage shed where the snowmobile was kept. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a few tries to get the door open, but when I did, I grabbed the keys off the hook and started it up. The engine roared to life, the sound cutting through the howling wind. I didn't even bother looking back. I threw on my parka and goggles, and in one panicked motion, I gunned the engine and took off into the endless white. I don't know how long I drove. It felt like hours. The cold wind whipped at my face, and my fingers were numb on the handles of the snowmobile. I had no idea where I was going, just that I needed to get as far away from that station as possible. But the whole time, I felt it, that presence, watching, waiting. The figure didn't need to follow me physically. It was already in my head, under my skin. I could feel it. The further I drove, the more that creeping sensation of being watched intensified, like no matter how far I went, I couldn't outrun it. The radio on the snowmobile crackled to life. I hadn't even realized it was on. Through the static, I heard the voice again, but this time, it was different. "It's too late," the voice said. "You're one of us now." I screamed into the void, the cold air tearing the sound from my lungs, but there was no answer, just the empty, unending landscape of snow and ice. I don't remember when the engine gave out. I just know that at some point, I was alone again. No snowmobile, no station, just me and the endless white, with the figure lurking somewhere in the distance, waiting for me to stop. They never found me, at least not the real me. Weeks later, a search party recovered what was left of my snowmobile, half buried in the snow. They found a body too, frozen solid, just a few miles from the wreckage. The official report said it was me, but it wasn't, because I'm still here. I don't know how much longer I have before it takes me completely, before I become just another one of those figures in the snow, watching, waiting for the next poor soul to take this job. And if you're reading this, if you ever get a job offer for a weather station in Antarctica, or anywhere remote like that, don't take it, because out here, in the cold, you're never truly alone. I found government documents about an alien base in Antarctica. Now they're coming for me. I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's because I need to get it all off my chest. Or maybe it's because I feel like I'm being watched. If something happens to me, at least someone will know the truth. I never thought I'd be that guy. You know, the one that spirals into some paranoid, conspiracy-fueled rant about aliens or government cover-ups. But here I am, and let me tell you, it's way more terrifying when you're living it. I guess it all started a few months ago, right? Like, I wasn't some deep web junkie or whatever. I'd heard about it. Who hasn't? Stories about hitmen, weird videos, and shady stuff like that. But I didn't care for any of it. Until one night, I was bored, super bored, and I made a dumb decision. My friends had been talking about the deep web like it was some mythical land filled with hidden treasure if you knew where to look. Curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't trying to find anything weird, just wanted to see what it was all about. Maybe find one of those hidden message boards or something. So, I downloaded Tor, the browser that lets you access the deep web, and thought I'd just poke around for a bit. The first hour or two was boring. It's not what you think. Most of it's just a bunch of sketchy markets and forums with terrible layouts. If anything, it was underwhelming. But just as I was about to close the whole thing and call it a night, I came across this one link. It didn't have a name or any description, just a string of random numbers and letters. Normally, I would have skipped over it, but something about it, I don't know, I just clicked. The site that loaded up was different. It was plain, no fancy graphics, no creepy videos or anything, just text. A huge, long wall of text, like some document or report. The title at the top said, Operation Deep Freeze, Restricted Access Only, Government Eyes Only. I thought it was some joke or fake classified document someone threw together to freak people out, but I scrolled down and started reading anyway. It wasn't long before I realized this thing wasn't a joke. The document was detailed, like painfully detailed. It was all about this base in Antarctica, something called Station 47, which I'd never heard of. It went on to describe how the base wasn't just some research station for studying ice cores or whatever. No, This base had been built around something deep underground, something massive, metallic, and not from Earth. They kept referring to it as the artifact. I kept reading because at this point, my heart was pounding in my chest. I don't know why, but something about it felt real. There were descriptions of alien technology, things that sounded straight out of a sci-fi movie, machines that could manipulate gravity, devices that emitted frequencies capable of changing human perception. There were even reports of experiments conducted on subjects to test how prolonged exposure to the artifact's energy fields affected the human brain. Spoiler, it wasn't good. The more I read, the more uneasy I felt. My screen had started to feel like a window into something I shouldn't be seeing. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. I was hooked. There was one section in the document that I still can't get out of my head. It was about some kind of creature. They called it a biological anomaly. Apparently the artifact wasn't just a machine. It was a signal, like a beacon, and it had attracted something. The report didn't go into a lot of detail, but it mentioned how the anomaly had appeared shortly after they activated the artifact. Whatever it was, they had it contained deep within Station 47, but the way they described it, it didn't sound like they had much control over it. At that point, I was starting to freak out a bit. It was late. I was alone in my apartment, and the more I read, the more paranoid I got. My mind was racing, and I swear I could hear every little creak and groan in my building. I decided to stop. I'd read enough. I was done. But here's the thing. When I tried to close the browser, it wouldn't close. My mouse was frozen, the whole screen locked up, and then this little window popped up in the center. It was a chat box. There was a single message in it. "You weren't supposed to see this." My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't type anything back. I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to convince myself that it was just someone messing with me. Just some deep web prank, right? Then another message appeared. "We're watching." I slammed my laptop shut. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound, every shadow outside my window made me jump. I was convinced someone was outside, watching me, waiting. I didn't even open my laptop for days after that. And that's when the weird stuff started happening. So, yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but things have only gotten worse since that night. I'll write more about it soon, but I need to keep my head down for a bit. I don't know who they are, but I'm starting to think they're really out there, and they don't want me talking about this. If you don't hear from me in a few days, well, you'll know why. Alright, things got worse after that night. It didn't take long for me to realize I'd screwed up big time. I guess I thought shutting my laptop would be the end of it, but looking back, that was stupid, naive even. Whatever I had stumbled on wasn't just some deep web creep trying to scare me. This was real, and I didn't know how real until it was too late. For the next few days, I tried to act normal. I went to work, hung out with friends, tried to push the whole thing out of my head. It wasn't easy though. Every time I was alone, that message kept replaying in my mind. "We're watching." At first, I thought it was paranoia. Like, obviously, I was just psyching myself out. But then, things started happening. Small things at first. My phone would vibrate like I had a text, but when I checked it, there was nothing. Weird, but whatever. Then, my Wi-Fi would drop for no reason, and when it came back on, Strange pop-ups would appear on my computer, even when I wasn't browsing. They were quick, just flashes of text that would disappear before I could read them. I tried to convince myself it was just a virus or some deep web malware screwing with me, but I was getting this sinking feeling that maybe it wasn't just my tech acting up. Then I noticed the car. I know how that sounds, believe me. But after that night, I started noticing this black sedan parked down the street from my apartment. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. I live in a pretty average neighborhood, nothing special. Cars come and go all the time. But the thing is, this car didn't go. It just sat there. Every day when I left for work, it was there. Same spot, never moved. It was subtle, but after a few days, I realized no one ever got in or out of it. I didn't tell anyone about it. I mean, what was I supposed to say? Hey, I think I'm being followed by some random black car because I read a creepy document on the internet. People would have thought I'd lost my mind. Hell, I thought I'd lost my mind. But that car, it wasn't just in my head. One morning, when I was leaving for work, I decided to get a little closer, just to confirm it was the same one. You know, to prove to myself that I wasn't just being paranoid. I walked past it like I was heading to my car, casual, not trying to look suspicious or anything. But as I got closer, I could feel this presence, like someone was watching me from inside. The windows were tinted, really tinted, so dark I couldn't see inside. I tried to glance in as I passed, but it was like staring into a void. I couldn't make out anything, but I could feel it. Someone was there. That was when my phone vibrated again. I pulled it out to check the message, figuring it was another glitch, but this time there was something there. It was an anonymous number. The message read, "We told you to stop." I stopped dead in my tracks. My stomach dropped. I glanced around, trying to see if anyone else was nearby. The street was empty. No one. Just me and the car. I shoved my phone back in my pocket and practically ran to my own car, heart pounding the whole way. When I looked back, the black sedan was still there, as still and silent as ever. After that, the feeling of being watched wasn't just in my head anymore. It was real. I started changing my routine, taking different routes to work, leaving at random times. But no matter what I did, the car was there. Always just far enough away to keep its distance, but close enough to remind me it wasn't going anywhere. Then, one night, things got worse. I'd stayed late at work, trying to distract myself from everything. It was dark when I finally left the office, and the whole building was pretty much empty. My car was one of the only ones left in the parking lot. I remember feeling that heavy sense of dread creeping in as I made my way to my car, like something bad was about to happen. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just another late night and I was tired, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. As I approached my car, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I froze, trying to figure out where it came from, but everything was still. Too still. I unlocked my car quickly, just wanting to get inside and get home. But as I reached for the door handle, I saw it. The black sedan, parked across the street from the office building. It hadn't been there when I arrived earlier. My throat went dry. I got in my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. But my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the keys into the ignition. I just wanted to get away. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing near the edge of the parking lot, tall, dressed in black, face obscured by the shadows. At first, I thought it was some random person out for a walk or something, but then I realized they weren't moving. They were just standing there, staring, watching. I didn't stick around to find out who they were. I floored it out of there and drove like a maniac the whole way home. But as I pulled into my apartment complex, I saw the sedan again, parked a few blocks down, like it had followed me the entire time without me noticing. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside my window made me jump, and every time a car passed, I was convinced it was them. I was terrified, like they were waiting for the right moment to make their move. And honestly, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep pretending everything is normal. So, yeah, that's where I'm at right now. They're watching me. They know I saw something I wasn't supposed to. And every time I think about that black sedan and the figure in the parking lot, I can't help but wonder, what the hell did I get myself into? After that night in the parking lot, things really started spiraling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even when I was inside my own apartment. It was like there was always a set of eyes on me, waiting for me to slip up. The worst part? I still didn't know who they were or what they wanted from me. I figured I had two choices. Either try to dig deeper into whatever the hell I had stumbled onto, or go completely off the grid and pretend none of it had ever happened. Honestly, I was leaning toward the latter. I mean, who the hell was I? Just some average guy who made a dumb decision one night. I didn't ask for any of this, but the thing is, when you're in too deep, it's not that easy to just walk away. I was about to find that out the hard way. It was a Thursday night, a couple of days after the incident in the parking lot. I'd been staying home, keeping a low profile, thinking maybe if I just laid low long enough, they'd lose interest in me. I was wrong. I had just finished heating up some leftovers when I heard it, a knock on the door. At first, I thought it was my neighbor, or maybe a package delivery. Normal stuff, right? But as I walked over to answer it, this sinking feeling set in. Something wasn't right. My building has one of those peepholes in the door, so I leaned in to take a quick look before unlocking it. There was no one there. I stood there for a second, confused. I was positive I had heard the knock, but the hallway was empty. My hand hovered over the doorknob, part of me wanting to open it and check if someone had just left. But that feeling in my gut, the one that had been building ever since I found that document, it was screaming at me to not open the door. Then it knocked again, louder this time. I jumped back, my heart racing. I knew what I'd heard. There was no way someone wasn't out there. But when I checked the peephole again, it was still empty. That's when I noticed something weird. The hallway light, the one right outside my door, was flickering. It wasn't totally off, but it was dimming and brightening in this erratic, almost pulsing way. I didn't remember it doing that before. I backed away from the door, trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was just a maintenance issue, a loose bulb, or something. Maybe I was overreacting, but then it hit me. My apartment complex is old, sure, but those lights had never flickered like that before, and the timing was too perfect, too deliberate. Then came the third knock. This time, it wasn't just a knock, it was more like pounding. 3 heavy thuds that echoed through the entire apartment. I wasn't about to open that door. Not anymore. I stepped back, my mind racing with what to do next. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no new messages. Part of me wanted to call the cops, but what was I supposed to tell them? Hey officer, I think the government is knocking on my door. because I read some alien documents online. Yeah, that would go over real well. I was paralyzed, just standing there, staring at the door like it was about to burst open any second. And then, nothing. No more knocks, no more pounding, just silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, listening, waiting. Every muscle in my body was tense, ready for whatever was going to happen next. But the hallway stayed quiet. The light outside stopped flickering and returned to normal. I waited another 10 minutes before I finally worked up the courage to check again. I crept back over to the door and peered through the peephole one more time. This time, I wasn't looking for a person. I was looking for anything, a sign that whatever had just happened was over. The hallway was completely still. No movement, no shadows, no sign of anyone. And then I saw it. A small folded piece of paper had been slipped under my door. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at it, trying to figure out how long it had been there, or how I hadn't noticed it before. My mind was racing with possibilities. Was it a message? A threat? Whatever it was from them. I was sure of it. I grabbed a towel from the kitchen, using it to carefully pick up the paper without touching it directly, like that would somehow protect me from whatever was coming next. It was folded neatly in half, no writing on the outside. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it. The paper was blank. I flipped it over, held it up to the light, checked it for watermarks or invisible ink. Nothing, just an ordinary blank sheet of paper. Except it wasn't ordinary, not at all. The message was clear. They could get to me whenever they wanted. I sat down, staring at the paper in my hands, trying to process everything that had just happened. The knocks, the light, the car. It was all connected. They were messing with me, sending me a warning. Maybe it was because I'd started asking too many questions in my own head. Maybe because I wasn't shutting up about what I'd seen. But whatever it was, they were letting me know that I was still on their radar. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after that. Every little sound, every creak in the walls, I thought they were coming for me. I started keeping my phone charged, my shoes by the bed, ready to run if I needed to. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was survival instinct kicking in. But even with all of that, the fear and paranoia, I still hadn't told anyone. I couldn't. The truth was, deep down, I knew no one would believe me. I mean, would you? A random guy claiming to have found classified documents about alien technology buried in Antarctica. It sounds insane, right? But it's real. And they know I know. And here's the thing that's keeping me up at night. I don't think the paper was the only message. There's something else. Something bigger that they're hiding from me. And I have a gut feeling that whatever it is, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. They've made it clear that they're watching me. And after that knock on the door, I know they're not just messing around anymore. If you're reading this, and you've been on the deep web before, don't go looking for anything related to Antarctica or alien bases. It's not worth it. Trust me. Whatever they're hiding down there, it's better left buried. It's crazy how fast your life can unravel. One moment, you think you're just an ordinary person going about your day, and the next, you're hiding in your own home, terrified of every sound, every shadow. After the knock on the door, and that blank sheet of paper, I thought I was at my breaking point. I was wrong. Things were about to get so much worse. After that night, I did everything I could to stay under the radar. I stopped going to work, claiming I was sick. I barely left my apartment, and when I did, it was only to grab essentials. I stayed away from my laptop completely. No more deep web. No more looking into the Antarctica stuff. I just wanted it all to go away. But it didn't. If anything, my attempts to ignore it seemed to make things escalate. The car was still there, parked on my street like it had been for days. But now I was seeing it in other places too. Once, when I went to the grocery store, same black sedan, parked at the far end of the lot. Another time, when I went for a quick walk to clear my head, it drove slowly by me, windows still tinted, still impenetrable. Always there, always watching. But it wasn't just the car. Things inside my apartment started to feel off. Little things at first. Stuff moved around when I was sure I hadn't touched it. A glass on the counter that I distinctly remember leaving in the sink. My phone charger unplugged when I knew for a fact I had left it in the wall. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Stress does weird things to your brain, right? Then one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were faint, just soft taps against the hardwood floor in the hallway outside my bedroom. I froze, not even daring to breathe. My apartment isn't big, and I know the sounds it makes. This wasn't one of them. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at my bedroom door, listening. The steps were slow and deliberate, like whoever was making them wanted me to know they were there. I glanced at my phone on the nightstand. 3:14 a.m. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, the silence was worse. I strained to hear anything, any sign of movement, but all I could hear was my own heart pounding in my chest. I thought maybe it was just a dream. Maybe I had woken up disoriented, my brain playing tricks on me. And then the door handle rattled. Not violently, just a slight movement, like someone testing it, checking to see if it was locked. I shot up in bed, heart racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins. My mind was spinning. Someone was in my apartment. I didn't know how they got in, but they were here, and they were right outside my door. I grabbed the only thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy lamp from my nightstand, and crept toward the door. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold on to it. Every second felt like an eternity. The handle rattled again, and I could hear my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I pressed my ear against the door, praying I'd hear them leave. But instead, there was a low, mechanical clicking sound, like someone was unlocking the door. Panic set in. I backed away, knowing I couldn't take whoever was on the other side. There was no way I could fight them off with a lamp. I tried to think of an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. My bedroom only had one window, and I was on the 3rd floor. Jumping wasn't an option. I braced myself for the door to swing open, but it didn't. The handle stopped rattling, the clicking stopped, and then nothing. I stood there, listening, waiting for the inevitable sound of the door creaking open, but it never came. After what felt like hours, I finally worked up the nerve to look through the crack under the door. There was no shadow, no sign of movement. I waited, still holding the lamp, like it would somehow protect me, before I finally opened the door. The hallway was empty, silent. The air felt thick with tension, like whatever had been out there was still lingering, just out of sight. I stepped into the hallway, every muscle in my body screaming at me to stay in my room, but I had to know. I had to be sure. The front door was wide open. I swear to you, I had locked it before bed. I always lock it. But there it was, standing open, the cool night air blowing in through the gap. I checked the locks. Nothing was broken. Nothing looked forced. It was like someone had simply unlocked it from the inside. That was when I realized it. They had been inside the whole time. My first instinct was to run, get out of the apartment, and just go. But where would I go? Who could I tell? I couldn't call the cops. They'd think I was insane. Instead, I shut the door, locked it, and barricaded it with whatever I could find. A chair, my dresser, anything to make sure that if they came back, they wouldn't be able to get in as easily. Then I sat on the floor, back against the door, staring at the open hallway in front of me, waiting for something to happen. The rest of the night passed without incident. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, gripping that stupid lamp, waiting for something to come through the door again. But it never did. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. I checked the whole apartment, but nothing else was out of place. Everything was exactly as I had left it, except for the door that had been opened in the middle of the night. It was like they wanted me to know they could come in whenever they wanted. They didn't need to knock anymore. But that's not even the worst part. The next day, I found something that chilled me to my core. I was going through my apartment, checking for any sign of how they could have gotten in. Windows, vents, anything. That's when I noticed the small black device hidden behind my bookshelf. It was a tiny camera. I have no idea how long it had been there or how many there might be, but it explained everything. The feeling of being watched, the strange occurrences, even the door being opened in the middle of the night. They hadn't just been following me. They'd been inside my apartment, watching me, studying me, and I hadn't even realized it. I didn't touch the camera. I didn't know if it was still active, but I knew better than to mess with it. Instead, I packed a bag with as much as I could carry and got out of there. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I've been staying at a motel on the edge of town for the past few days, using a different name, paying in cash. I know it's only a temporary solution, and I don't know how much longer I can hide. Whoever these people are, they're not going to stop. I've seen too much, and they're not going to let me walk away. The car followed me here too. I saw it parked down the street this morning. They know where I am, and I'm running out of places to go. By the time I checked into the motel, I was barely holding it together. The paranoia had eaten away at whatever shred of sanity I had left. I could feel them closing in, like a tightening noose. It didn't matter how far I ran or how much I tried to hide. They were always one step ahead. And the worst part, I still didn't know who they were. I spent the first night at the motel with the lights on, every noise from the outside making my pulse spike. I kept staring at the door, waiting for someone to knock, for that same rattling handle, but it never came. The car was still there though. I saw it through the grimy window, parked at the far end of the lot, just sitting there in the shadows, like it always did. I'd thought about going to the cops 100 times, but what could I say? I'd sound like a lunatic. I found secret government documents about an alien base, and now they're sending people to follow me. I'd be in a padded room before the end of the day. Besides, after finding that camera in my apartment, I knew they had ways of covering their tracks. Whoever they were professionals, and I was in, over my head. That second night at the motel, things took a turn I wasn't prepared for. I hadn't left the room all day, too scared to draw attention to myself. I'd pulled the curtains closed, triple-checked the locks, and pushed the dresser in front of the door for good measure. I figured it would at least slow them down if they tried to get in. But as the hours ticked by, I realized I couldn't keep this up. I couldn't keep running. Sooner or later, They were going to catch up with me, and when they did, I had no idea what they'd do. Around midnight, I heard the buzzing. At first, I thought it was my phone, but when I checked, the screen was blank. The sound was coming from the ceiling, a low droning hum, so quiet I barely noticed it at first. It almost sounded like electricity, but not quite. It had this pulsing quality to it, like it was vibrating just above my head. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the hell it was. And then, without warning, the buzzing stopped. Complete silence. For a second, I thought I was imagining things, that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me after days of being in this constant state of fear. But then my phone lit up. A message. Look outside. It was the same anonymous number, the same one from before. My heart started pounding as I slowly got up and moved toward the window, careful not to make too much noise. I peeled back the edge of the curtain just enough to see outside. The car was gone. I blinked, confused. I scanned the parking lot, but it was empty. For the first time in days, the black sedan wasn't there. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt even more terrified. Something was wrong. Then, as I pulled back from the window, I noticed the lights outside had dimmed. Not just the ones in the parking lot, the lights in my room too. The whole motel was suddenly bathed in this sickly, pale glow. I stood frozen for a moment, listening, waiting for something to happen. That's when I heard the footsteps. But this time, they weren't coming from outside the door. They were coming from above me, slow, deliberate, moving across the ceiling of my room. My heart was in my throat as I stared up, my mind racing. I knew there wasn't an attic or anything above me, just the roof. So what the hell was making those sounds? I backed away toward the door, my hands shaking. The footsteps stopped, and for a few seconds, everything went quiet again. Then came the thudding. It was heavy, rhythmic, like someone or something was pounding on the roof directly above me. I could hear the ceiling creaking, the sound of plaster cracking under the pressure. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, staring at the ceiling as dust started to fall from the cracks forming above. And then the message came again. It's time. I didn't have time to react. The ceiling above me splintered with this gut-wrenching crack, and a section of it collapsed inward, sending debris crashing down onto the bed. I stumbled back, choking on the dust and plaster, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. In the hole above me, there was something moving, something alive. It was hard to describe, like a writhing mass of limbs? No, not limbs. Something else. Something that didn't belong to any living thing I'd ever seen. They were black, almost metallic, shimmering in the dim light, shifting and undulating like they were moving on their own. And in the center of it all, I could just barely make out a face. Number, not a face. A mask. It was featureless, smooth, with no eyes, no mouth. Just a blank, oval mask staring down at me through the hole in the ceiling. The air in the room grew cold, colder than it had any right to be, and that buzzing sound started up again, louder this time, drilling into my skull, making it impossible to think. I didn't know what to do. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring up at this impossible thing, trying to comprehend what was happening. That's when I realized they weren't just following me. They were waiting for me, and I had walked right into their trap. The buzzing grew louder, and the thing in the ceiling began to descend, its limbs, or whatever they were, stretching down toward me. I finally snapped out of my paralysis and bolted for the door, shoving the dresser aside with all the strength I had. I yanked open the door and sprinted out into the night. But it wasn't night anymore. The sky above the motel wasn't dark. It was this unnatural, swirling mass of gray, with strange, flickering lights dancing just beneath the clouds. The air felt heavy, like the atmosphere itself was pressing down on me. I could barely breathe. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice before finally getting the door unlocked. I didn't look back at the motel. I didn't want to see whatever was happening behind me. I knew if I did, I'd lose it completely. I slammed the car into gear and tore out of the parking lot, the tires screeching as I sped down the empty road. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. But as I glanced in the rearview mirrors, I saw it. The black sedan. It was right behind me, keeping pace no matter how fast I drove. Its headlights were off, but I could still see it, the outline of the car blending into the unnatural glow of the sky. There was no escape. I don't know how long I drove. Minutes, hours. Time didn't feel real anymore. But eventually, I realized the car wasn't following me. It was guiding me. I pulled over on the side of the road, not because I wanted to, but because something was pulling me. Some force I couldn't explain. I got out of the car and stood there, staring at the black sedan as it came to a stop a few feet ahead of me. The driver's side door opened, but no one stepped out. The car was empty. And then my phone buzzed one last time. "We're ready for you. I'm writing this now from a place I don't recognize. It's cold here, colder than anywhere I've ever been. I think I'm underground. I don't know how I got here, but I know they're close. I can hear them, the buzzing, the footsteps, the voices. If you're reading this, don't look for me. Don't try to find out what happened to me. And whatever you do, don't go digging into things you're not supposed to. They're always watching, and once they find you, there's no going back."